Hello and welcome to the Connections webinar series brought to you by the Master of Arts in Communication and the Johns Hopkins University Office of Advanced Academic Programs. Today's event features a conversation with Tim Alexander, global social media influencer and alumnus of the MA in Communication program. My name is Peter Huggins and I'm the event producer. Please note today's event will be recorded and uploaded to the AAP YouTube channel under the Connections playlist. During the program, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A function, and we'll answer as many of your questions as possible during the Q&A portion of the event. With that, I will turn the event over to our moderator, Patricia Hernandez, Assistant Program Director and Lecturer for the Master of Arts in Communication program.
Thank you, Peter, and welcome. We apologize for the slight delay. Of course, there's sometimes some technical difficulties, and I'm so excited to have Tim join us, who has 2 master's degrees, one from the lovely Johns Hopkins program, and Tim also took courses on ground, which is exciting because we have both online and on ground courses. And I was so pleased to have met Tim through an alumni engagement survey, and I'm excited to hear about his experience, as are all of you that are joining. And so I'm going to, well, Tim does global social media. He's an influencer, has extensive experience now living in Brooklyn. I was a little disappointed he wasn't still in DC, but I'm happy to have him join us. And without further ado, Tim, I'll let you take over.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Hernandez. Once again, a special thank you to you for giving me this opportunity to share a bit about myself and offer a bit of helpful tips for the future social media marketer. So as Dr. Hernandez said, I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience, a bit about my background, and then, hopefully provide some helpful tips around social media and what the future of marketing looks like. So to provide a bit of background, my name is Tim Alexander. I'm originally from the Bay Area, so Bay Area, California, and I've worked in the field of social media, influencer marketing, and community management for some time now. Before jumping into my background, I'd love to start with this. Part of our human nature is finding new ways of being. This is a quote by Bozoma St. John. She's a Ghanaian American marketing genius and fierce advocate for diversity and leadership. She has a pretty amazing track record, from working at Apple to Uber, and most recently, Chief Marketing Officer of a little known company, maybe you've heard of it, Netflix. She's pretty inspirational, and she's actually the mentor in my head, although we've never met. What really strikes me about this quote, this idea of human nature being about finding new ways of just being, is the word new, because it excites within me this idea and sense of reinvention and what's next. Anyone working in the field of communication, no matter the role, understands how important adaptability to new situations is, and how those who don't adapt to new technologies or new ways of being or even new ways of working have a hard time moving forward. So what's communication? To me, communication is actually about what's next. And communicators everywhere work to reimagine the future of information exchange to bring people, communities, and countries together from worlds apart. And this idea of what's new, or this sense of reinvention and constantly adapting, improving, and evolving, applies to career journeys too. So without further ado, I'm going to talk a little bit about mine. I actually stumbled upon social media while working as an English to Spanish simultaneous interpreter, which is something a lot of people listening right now would never have thought, would come out of my mouth. I've had a passion for foreign language since studying Spanish at the age of 8, with dreams of becoming some huge, prolific Spanish professor. And while I worked as a part-time interpreter at a local nonprofit in San Jose, California, I pursued a graduate degree in Spanish linguistics. So there I was, performing Spanish to English interpretation for board meetings at a nonprofit. It's called Sacred Heart. But walk with me here, because it gets a little, serendipitous. The nonprofit director, who I worked pretty closely with on a lot of the simultaneous interpretations, one day just asked me if I had any interest in working in social media. And mind you, I was working as an interpreter, so social media was the last thing on my mind. And at that time, I was on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, and even OG Tumblr, RIP to Tumblr, for those of you know. But I use social media more so as someone who was a consumer and less as a producer. And this is where the idea of what's next and this, sense of reinvention comes into play, right? Because I went out on a limb, did something that scared me and tried something new. And that moment actually changed the course of my career and is the reason I'm in front of you today. The job wasn't glamorous. It wasn't even paid. So I worked as a simultaneous interpreter, social media intern, and on-campus writing tutor, while also finishing up a master's degree. So if you're wondering, yeah, I didn't sleep much from 2015 to 2017, but it was the only time I could, do 2 unpaid internships and still survive. I don't think I could do that in 2023, and I wouldn't want to. It sounds a bit cheesy, but I never fell in love with social media. I mean, I liked it, but what really drew me to the profession was the end result. It was the impact. This was a local nonprofit we're talking about, and it catered to largely Latino residents in Silicon Valley, which is one of the most expensive areas in the United States, and unfortunately has a huge, income inequity. So, there's a lot of things that we did while we worked there, right? So anything from toy drives to, turkey giveaways, movie nights, and we worked with local governments to create policies that gave San Jose State residents a fighting chance. Now, during this internship, I was in charge of creating social content on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and this was in 2016. So no TikTok era, right? There was no, dancing involved. And with every social media post I wrote, we'd get a flood of love. People in the city and beyond interacting with our content, thanking us for keeping them informed, sharing memories about the various toy drives. It was instant feedback that we were making a difference. That's when I realized the impact of social media, good storytelling, and good content. It was social's role in creating community through engagement. And at that time, still living in California, right, 2017, I learned the importance of taking a risk, because if I didn't take that internship, I'd probably be a Spanish professor right now, and I'm not sure if I would have liked it. So after graduating, 2017, a few years ago, I completely changed directions, both literally and figuratively, and moved to Washington, DC. 8 months into DC, around early 2018, I was pretty desperate to work in social media. I really didn't care about the industry. It could be nonprofit, it could be something in tech, it could be financial services, it could really be anything. So I probably sent out 90 to 100 applications and had one interview. And anyone who works in marketing or social media communications in general recognizes how overly saturated the industry is and the profession, and at times how difficult it is to even get an interview. So I actually made it to the interview, which was great. And once you get to the interview, everything is simple after. That's really half the battle. So after I landed the interview at this company called Siemens, which is this, kind of huge kind of conglomerate that's based in Germany, but they have headquarters also in Washington, DC, I was one in 300 applicants, and I ended up getting the job. I was told by the hiring manager that I was the most prepared. And here's a quick lesson for aspiring marketers or anyone in general. Before any interview, study the company's social media channels. Get well acquainted with the website. If that's blog content, you're looking at press releases, or you're getting acquainted with their product offerings. And if you have the time, join their newsletter. I can't tell you how many newsletters I've had to just unsubscribe to, but it was worth it. I'm serious. This is a game changer, and you'll definitely stand out. Because during a lot of these interviews, what's most important is that you understand the ethos of the company. You understand their mission and what truly drives them. And you're able to explain that back to the hiring manager. I was eventually onboarded as a social media and community manager. I would write social content, work on strategy, coordinate images and videos with the creative team. Pretty standard social media stuff. And to be honest, I was just happy to be there. I was also brought into the company's influencer program, which is amazing because I was able to learn from and connect with some of the biggest influencers in tech within the United States. And that's actually how a lot of my love for influencer engagement, marketing, content creation was ignited. But after 4 years into the job, my trajectory would change completely. I was brought into a room by my manager, and trust me, you never want to be brought into a room with your manager. You never know what's going to happen. It could be a pretty scary time, especially today's age. But it's a turn of events, and she was really happy with the work that I'd been doing and had a proposition for me. The company was hiring a new CEO, and leadership wanted me to manage their social. Yes, I recently turned 26 at the time, fresh out of graduate school, and I was asked to manage the social media of a CEO of a $25 billion company, which was to me incredibly wild and beyond my wildest dreams. I would then follow this CEO across the United States, from the Today Show to Washington Post and the home of Disney World. Now, we did some pretty amazing things, but what really stuck with me was an evening in Atlanta, Georgia. After hosting an event, we stopped off at the first ever Chick-fil-A. Quick side note, I did not know Chick-fil-A was founded in Atlanta, Georgia. This was new to me, but the CEO, she knew, and she was really excited to stop there, so said, why not? I had to take advantage of this moment while we were eating, so I asked her, almost, interview style, what's the secret to your success? She said, speak up, use your voice, command a room, come to the table with not just problems, but solutions to problems. Barbara, her full name is Barbara Humpton. You can look her up. She's absolutely amazing. She's had a super illustrious career, starting off at IBM. Here's the problem that so many of us experience. Barbara was the only person who looked like her in the room, every time. And she realized if she didn't make herself heard, and if she didn't speak up, she wouldn't stand a chance. And as much as things have changed in 2023, a lot has remained the same. Black and brown people, members of the LGBTQI community, women, members of the disability community and neurodivergent communities, and the places in which we all intersect, have unfortunately experienced obstacles in corporate structures and institutions that weren't necessarily created with us in mind. But I think there's a way we can use intersectionality as a superpower. And intersectionality is really just the intersect between race, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation. It defines the things that make us different or kind of set us apart when compared to more of a homogenized American society. And I'm going to take it a step further because I think, better yet, I know bringing difference into perspective to the table allows us to be better, more empathetic, and culturally competent marketers. And when diversity beyond just thought or perspective, but including ethnicity, language, class, gender, and beyond are brought to the table, we can come up with some pretty authentic solutions to some of the most difficult challenges. Because at the end of the day, life is intersectional. And I think this is something that Barbara always knew, and I was just beginning to find out. Early 2020, COVID hit, and things were never the same. Companies scrambled to amplify communications about plans to go remote and outlined how they were protecting their staff from the spread of COVID. And a few months after that, rather, in the height of COVID, the murder of George Floyd happened, which was a really devastating time for everyone, specifically the Black community. And interestingly enough, Floyd forced a lot of companies to think and rethink their diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, and whether they were actually doing enough for the Black community. Newsflash, a lot of these companies weren't, including some that I had worked for. So when it came to drafting something for the passing of George Floyd, as a lot of people did across social media and a lot of companies were really urged to show just what they were doing and whether or not they were doing something. And they were really having that honest conversation as well on how they can engage and uplift Black communities and Black companies. I actually led my company's social media response. And to be honest, I was the only minority in the room and on the social team. But even that was empowering because I knew the response that was crafted by this company, that was created by me, would come from a really authentic place. I was using my cultural competence and empathy as a superpower to bring genuineness to external communications, and it resonated. Here's a thought. Maybe you're creating an employee-centered campaign, which is something completely in your control, or you're drafting a social response to police brutality in your backyard. Two opposite ends of the spectrum, right? But in both cases, people, your audience, want real and authentic. They want human and they want the truth. We see companies leveraging PR and social media every day to greenwash or even whitewash their initiatives. It's not just about knowing better, but doing better through real, tangible action. And trust me, I know things can be difficult, just working in social and marketing in general, right? Passing things through legal, especially when you want it to be authentic and true to form, can be challenging. You know, content and messaging can get diluted. But this is also why giving people of color, members of the LGBTQI community, and women a seat at the table is so vital. A few months later, right after graduating from Johns Hopkins, go Blue Jays, I was part of the select few who jumped ship and found a new position at the height of the pandemic. And it was a jump from a social media team to being the sole social media manager, and by proxy, the head of all information exchange across social media globally for this company. I wrote tweets, I worked with influencers like, famed chess champion Gary Kasparov, and built the company's first measurable social media strategy. For perspective, to this day, I've been with the company for about 3 years now, but the first year in 2020 was the most difficult. I was always on, meaning always on my company laptop, always on my phone, and always monitoring my company's social feed. And there were 9 feeds to monitor, so the day-to-day was pretty hectic and the burnout was real. And I felt like I had to prove myself at that time. After all, I was one of, if not the youngest person in the department of 130 people. When I look back, I think what drove me to work nights and weekends was imposter syndrome. And I don't recommend that work ethic at all, by the way. But here's one thing I'll say about imposter syndrome. When you're in these spaces and you have this lingering feeling you didn't earn your position, remember one thing: you're already in the place, you're already in the space, and you wouldn't be there if you didn't deserve it. The longer I stayed in the position and the better I performed, the more I realized this to be true. I also realized something you don't necessarily learn in college. My current manager told me after performance evaluation, he said, the better you perform, the greater your asking power. And as long as you make a case for something, you can have anything. Now, this isn't always true for every position or every company, but this is why your manager is so important, because they can empower you and they can advocate for you. I ended up earning a few global company awards, and after 1.5 years on the job, I asked if we could create a new position, a new open role in Europe. This would be my counterpart. My manager advocated for me and he made it happen. I later onboarded an agency even to provide social media support with the blessing of my CMO. And soon after that, I was promoted to senior manager. So in this case, the hard work did pay off. And the things I asked for back then are now my reality today. While working in a role that touches so many different countries and regions and is filtered through different languages and dialects, one of the most important things I could do to create compelling marketing campaigns was ask questions and really just listen. There are things you can't get from a textbook or an article on marketing strategies in Japan or India. So it's best to build relationships with employees in those regions. Instead of pushing outdated and sometimes culturally insensitive or irrelevant information, just ask and create meaningful content that meets your global audience where they are. So you have a global social position. Let's do a little bit of role playing here. And you're entrusted to work with people from Singapore to France. What do? You should probably get up to speed on the differences between things like translation and localization. And here's a quick hint. These concepts are totally different. So this is my few minutes to kind of nerd out about language. Translation is actually taking the written word and translating it for a different audience, a different language. Let's say American English to Castilian or Spain Spanish. In English, we would say potato chips. In Spanish, we would say papas fritas, right? That's a direct translation. Localization, on the other hand, is a lot more effective and takes into consideration cultural nuances when translating. It's like translation, but with a bunch more context around it. Let's say you're talking about a popular American snack, like chocolate chip cookies. In Castilian Spanish, instead of cookies, which are galletas, it would be churros con chocolate, or churros with chocolate. Because at the end of the day, the type of snack isn't nearly as important as the cultural relevance of that snack. And churros with chocolate is probably the most widely celebrated snack in Spain. I mean, I lived in Spain and you can go to any cafe without seeing it. Oh, and no need to be a translator or interpreter or have a master's degree in a foreign language to do this. We typically have translators on staff, but I did have to create the social media processes around translation, localization, how campaigns are translated, and when. So once again, this entire process of creating marketing campaigns that stick in other regions just takes a lot of listening and some trial and error. Make sure you're attentive to the marketing folks in other regions, and you're not just sending them campaigns with the expectation they'll actually resonate, because oftentimes they don't. And then we see, PR crises, not gonna name any names, but there's a lot going on. All of this is actually intercultural communication. Exercising cultural competency goes beyond messaging and creative briefs. Recognizing and celebrating our differences and being able to communicate needs in smart, sensitive ways can get your message across quickly and without upsetting your colleagues from across the Atlantic. And when this is done correctly, you can better connect with people from around the world. This makes managing teams, agencies, and departments easier. So the skills you pick up on your marketing journey, whether they're soft skills or hard ones, have an impact on your trajectory from company to company. And I learned pretty quickly that there are some skills a social media practitioner just can't live without. The first one is communication, because as marketers, we spend a lot of time just communicating. And working in social is all about playing one huge game of telephone. It's our job to share current events, company happenings, and announcements in easy to understand ways that make the organization look great. So it's almost like a TikTok video with a beauty filter on. When I think about great communication, there are always a few things that I consider. The first one is what needs to be communicated. Is this a product launch or is it company news, or is this like an influencer partnership? The second is, how are you communicating this? Is this going out on social media? And if so, which channels? Does this make more sense on LinkedIn, or should this be on TikTok? And thirdly, who are you communicating this to? The key here is audience. The audience greatly shapes the overall message. For example, you wouldn't communicate the same way to a customer or an executive board member as you would an employee. Your message should fit your audience like a glove. So the typical things that I consider are what needs to be communicated, how are you communicating this, and who are you communicating this to? And some of my communication rules to live by are, if you want to be a better communicator, read more communications. And that goes for social content, that goes for newsletters, memos, written communication, as well as verbal. So I would throw in speeches too. Listen more. Listening is one of the best ways to improve communication. That could be interpersonal, so listening intently to the person you're speaking with before responding, or that could be social listening, so using social tools to track conversation around your brand, competitors, or industry. In both cases, you'll have an easier time responding when you genuinely understand what's being communicated to you or about you. And last, simplicity sells. Believe it or not, writing at a 5th grade level on social media, for example, can in some cases improve readability and increase engagement. So this isn't really about talking down to people, it's about creating messages that just about anybody could understand. So avoid those overly complex words and simplify your sentence structure. After great communication, I think one of the most valuable abilities when working in social media is creativity. And yeah, I do believe that there are some people who are just innately, really creative, but I also think creativity can be taught. Me, for example, I'm not always the most creative person in the room. And when it comes to ideas on social media trends like using TikTok or Lemonade, but I am, the most well-researched. my eyes and ears are always open to the latest Lil Nas X tactics or McDonald's campaigns, and I use celebrities and brands I follow as inspiration. Because these brands, whether they're influencers or global companies at the top of their game, show us marketers what's possible. And that's the thing about working in marketing. We're inundated with so many ads and videos and commercials on a day-to-day basis that inspiration is truly everywhere. You just need to know where to look. So just thinking through a few creativity hacks, consume media. And I mean media you enjoy, from the brands that motivate and inspire you. Use your authenticity and background to guide your creativity and approach to social media. I can't tell you how many times I've recommended working with influencers of color or women, and just because of my recommendation, and just because I'm in the room, our marketing department made it happen, and they took it seriously. So I use that creativity in terms of my cultural background to make sure that there's visibility among influencers and content creators of color and people who are doing things that are really out of the box. So using that as my superpower to push others forward. Next, you have creative ideas, so make your voice heard and raise your hand. That's really the moment in your time to shine and to share your new ideas. When recommending something, be able to back it up with research. That's super important when you're in any job. You want to make sure that you're able to provide facts or figures, some type of ROI as well. Personally, I love using Sprout Social, HubSpot, Business Insider. Typically, when I'm creating a lot of brief material or coming up with a new content series, I want to make sure I have something that I can reference, right? So that I can show them, hey, other companies have done this, other influencers have done this. This is proven to work. This is why we need to be doing it. And lastly, don't sleep on your personal brand. Your creativity should go beyond investing just in your company's brand. Invest in yourself as well. It's how a lot of social media strategists and comms professionals in general are getting hired nowadays. They have solid brands, and you should too. Communication and creativity are vital skills, but here's something you won't find on Google. It's important as a social strategist to develop a vision for the future. Creating tactics that grow your company's following or increase engagements can only get you so far. I typically do an intake process when I start at a new company. I take a step back and I really evaluate the company's social media landscape through social listening. So making sure that I'm paying close attention to the audience's comments, hashtag usage, keyword search, and also sentiment. And sentiment is just the overall feeling around a company's brand, products, and services. Secondly, social monitoring. So making sure I'm paying attention to mentions about the company. And then thirdly, polling community members to gain valuable insight. So breaking out, LinkedIn polls, Instagram polls, Twitter polls, asking open-ended questions on TikTok and things of that nature, really gauge your audience so you have a better understanding of the types of things they like, what they want to learn about, what they're passionate about, and the things that they don't really care about. And after digging into more meaningful metrics, you have the tools to create a valuable strategy that better informs, educates, and entertains your customers, your partners, and your employees. This is the vision. Doing the work on the front end allows you to create more social media first content. And when I say social media first, I mean content created for the sole purpose of social media. So it's usually a bit trendier and connects to moments in time like National Dog Day or hashtag Oscars 2023. It can also be content that uses the different functions of a social platform, like starting an Instagram live series or a collection of reels. Creating social media first content is the fastest way to boost engagement and grow your community. And while this is not revolutionary, social media first content has been around forever, right? It's something a lot of companies don't really do, as they typically rely on a lot of marketing collateral like white papers and ebooks to spread the word about the company, when what people really want is to be entertained, they want to be engaged, and they want to be excited around what you're doing. At the end of the day, marketing is really about connecting with people. So knowing what inspires and motivates your audience will make all the difference. Social media is one of the fastest moving professions, from following micro trends on TikTok to macro trends on LinkedIn. I mean, Instagram just announced they'd be reprioritizing static images over video after years of pushing cat reels through the algorithm. And I'm sure if you listen to this talk from a year from now, there'll be the next killer app, right? The next social media platform, and we'll all be a part of the metaverse, which is a joke because I'm just still not very convinced about the metaverse. I don't know what's happening with that. So in the sentiment of Bozoma St. John, what's next? And what are the tools, technologies, and digital movements we should be aware of to keep reinventing ourselves? If I had a crystal ball, I would say master ChatGPT and integrate it into your day-to-day life. The app takes the guesswork out of lower level decisions and allows you to prioritize more high-level challenges within marketing. Speaking of marketing, influencer marketing isn't going anywhere. I know there's all these articles and think pieces that came out in 2022 and 2023 talking about almost like the death of the influencer, right? Influencers are going away. But what's really interesting is that companies are collaborating with content creators in far more sophisticated ways today, more than ever before. So if your organization doesn't have an influencer program, you may want to be the person to lead that initial conversation. The creator economy, so looking at content creators, that's here to stay. And social platforms like TikTok and YouTube are investing hundreds of millions of dollars into creator funds that make finding the right influencers in your industry that much easier. There's going to be a focus, well, there has been a focus, and there's going to continue to be a focus on edutainment, which is short form, fun content that educates and entertains your audience. This will continue to be one of the leading drivers of community building and lead generation, as well as brand evangelism. And last but not least, here's some good news. Authenticity and the idea of creating human-centered content, campaigns, and series that showcase people first will continue to thrive. When I was asked by Professor Hernandez to speak today, I'll be honest, I was a little surprised because I'm not some 20-year digital czar who changed the face of direct-to-consumer marketing or some PR whiz who revolutionized the field of crisis communications. But as I peeled back the layers of my experiences, I noticed a few characteristics that may speak to why I'm here today. I like to try new things. I love to take risks, fail fast, and push for success. The marketers around me, many of them my official or unofficial mentors, are where they are today, not because they played it safe or even followed some standard career journey. Some of them started in completely unrelated fields, far outside of their passions, and some of them didn't even know what their passions were until way later in life. But all of them had something in common: persistence and a vision for the future. They knew wherever they were at the time wouldn't be where they ended up, and they pushed forward in spite of it all. Bozoma said, part of our human nature is finding new ways of being. Many of the greatest marketers I've ever known move through the world with this idea of reinvention and always asking themselves, what's next? And I'm here to say, you should be asking yourself that same question too. So here are a few parting lessons from a still green / not so green social media strategist. If it doesn't scare you, it's probably not worth doing. Overnight success takes years. Social media is a highlight reel. I promise you everyone has their ups and downs, including Beyonce. If you're in your comfort zone, now's the time to leave. And lastly, authenticity and showing who you are to the people around you is the most powerful statement you can ever make. Thank you, that's my time. And now we're gonna open up for questions.
Yeah, I think my video is coming back on, maybe. I don't see it coming back on. I'm here. You can hear me though, right? Oh, here we go. Video. Okay. Thank you so much, Tim. That was so inspiring. I have like a ton of notes and a million questions and comments, but I want to let the audience ask first and then I will jump in. So yeah, we'll open up the, just put your questions or comments. We've had several comments already in the chat box. So if you have any questions for Tim or comments, just go ahead and put in the chat box and I'll monitor that. And I guess while we wait, yeah, like I said, first of all, it was such an inspiring talk. I mean, I teach for a living, and I sent a message to the director of the program. I was like, we need to hire him as an adjunct. So
oh my gosh.
so
We'll
It's
talk.
it's so refreshing to have a presentation without a PowerPoint and be so, again, just like our program is very practical based, but then you talking from your experience. And I love that example of how you said when I reached out, you're like, well, I don't, what do I really have to share? I mean, you have so much to share. And I think a part of that is taking the time to reflect on what you've done and what you've gone through. We often don't do that. And so I really appreciate the time that you took to do the work to prepare for this presentation, because it was fantastic. So thank you so much for all your advice, and their analogies are amazing. So yeah, I really
No,
appreciate
thank you. I really had to take a deep dive when I created this and recognize, okay, there are things to share. There are lessons
Yeah,
learned. There is
yeah.
advice there, right? And it was really kind of molding all of it into kind of an easy to understand, more palatable story. But
Mhm.
it was a really fun journey.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I wrote. Like, your ability to storytell is phenomenal. One of the things you had mentioned toward the end was this idea of what's next. So I read the article today in the New York Times about how social media, it's become so much more of just brands and connecting with people as opposed to people connecting with other people, and
Mhm.
how there's going to be just more people going to smaller niche social media, which, I mean, Instagram is not going anywhere, Facebook isn't, but I just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on where, I mean, there's going to be a new social media app, etc. One of the things I also thought was interesting, they never mentioned Be Real app in
Mhm.
this article, because I think that's kind of where people are. There's this idea of, okay, we understand Instagram is you're putting out your best self, it's whatever, and then the Be Real is kind of tailoring to that. Okay, we want something that's actually real.
Mhm.
But yeah, so there's going to be new apps and more. But do you think with the New York Times article, it was basically all you see now is, not all, but sponsored ads and more of just like branding as opposed to connecting with people?
What's really interesting about that, and I mean, to your point around Instagram, which is kind of this really flashy, putting your best foot forward, like
Mhm,
your best self, and then there's this Be Real, right, which is almost this
mhm.
almost this kind
Right,
of counterculture
absolutely.
within
Yeah,
Generation Z, who's like, no, we want more real,
yeah.
authentic people and presentations. We also see
Mhm.
that a bit in TikTok. That's really interesting,
Mhm,
but
yeah.
I see a lot of, yeah, there's a bunch of sponsored content out there, and
Mhm,
it's not always the most authentic and or
mhm,
genuine, but I think what people are really craving are community. They want
mhm,
community. They want some closeness. They want, some semblance of authenticity. And I
mhm,
really think smaller communities that are more niche and kind of drilled down, to me, seems like the future. And
mhm.
I just know it's going to be, before long, until some company or some social platform is trying to capitalize on the fact that people want,
Well,
smaller, more genuine
I
communities.
think that's exactly it, right?
Yeah,
It's just,
yeah.
yeah. Uh, we have a question, but I have more. So, Dr. Alatrek, asked, thanks for the excellent talk, Tim. What things work best across global cultures in terms of social media posts? Does humor work? Cultural symbols, stories? If something plays well in Japan, how can we know it will play well in France?
That's such a great question. And typically, humor, if it's localized humor and it is humor that is attached to a specific region, that makes a lot of sense. But for instance, I mean, I manage global channels that are in English, and I also manage channels that are in, Japanese, Spanish, French, etc. So with these English channels that are global, I typically don't include a whole bunch of humor. Or specific symbols that are culturally attached and or tied to the United States, for instance,
Mhm.
because it typically doesn't resonate. And we've done a bit of A/B testing with that in the past, seeing, what works, what doesn't work. Does humor, do specific symbols, work? And we see that, I mean, not surprisingly, they don't. What's really interesting is I actually onboarded an agency about a year and a half ago, and this was an agency based in Singapore. They were providing a lot of on-the-ground support for our social media initiatives in Japan. And we worked with the creative team and came up with all of our in-house creative team and came up with all these images and these ads. And the ads were Americans. They were, they showcased Americans. And we sent this to the Singapore agency and they were like, no, you can't use this. Like, we need ads that are, recognizing, Japanese
Mhm.
culture and customs
Mhm.
and people. And
Mhm.
of course, it's a no-brainer. right? That's the type of content that you want to make sure you're putting out, things that actually resonate with that location, that region, that country. But that was a massive fail on our end, and we learned pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to go off of that, I loved your comment about, and I mean, I'm the co-chair of the DEI committee at Hopkins, and it's been an important part of, I mean, my academic career, and I love that you mentioned we need more than diversity of thought, and that is like, yeah, of course it's important, but I feel like we have that no matter what. Like, we don't need an initiative to have a diversity of thought. So I loved that you mentioned that, and to your point about knowing your audience and like who you're targeting in different countries. Diversity of thought, that's just not going to cut it. You need to have much more than that at the board, at the table, the decision makers, people on your team.
Exactly. And the thing, when it comes to diversity of thought, when it comes to the overall audience, we can see through that. Like, you have to recognize that your audience is intelligent. It's a collection of people, and they can typically see through a lot of the maybe greenwashed initiatives and kind of call a spade. So you definitely want to be attentive to that, because you don't want some, crisis of epic proportions. So
yeah. And what does your current company do with regards to like your DEI initiatives, and how they actually, obviously everyone has like a mission statement and things, but like, how do they live it out?
That's such a good question. So in terms of the DEI initiatives, there are several ERGs that are catered to really just catered to having real conversations around culture, around diversity. And what's interesting is that, I mean, we always want, more. We always want to make sure that companies are doing more, that we're pushing companies to really either atone or to make sure that they are actually doing things that are positively impacting, Black and Brown and Indigenous communities. But what we're currently doing, it is a start, but I think there's so much more that the company can do, not only internally among employees, but also DEI initiatives that are external and that we're able to really talk about and really live out loud. So there's more to come on that.
Yeah, great. All right. So we have any other questions? Oh, we have one. Okay. Oh, that was just sent to me. Okay. So for companies and organizations that don't understand social media, what would be your advice on how to sell the value / idea of implementing social media to those companies as a communication professional?
That is honestly I feel like the majority of social media strategists have this experience to some varying degree, right? Some of us jump into companies that, do prioritize social media, but there's so much more they can do. Others, we jump into companies like what I did, my current company, that really didn't have a, measurable kind of social media strategy. And there wasn't necessarily concerted effort around propping up social media as something that is really valuable for external communication. So when I jumped into the position, I really hit the ground running. I did a lot of research. So to the point about having that vision for the future within social media, it's doing the research, looking at the overall health of this company. How are we performing on social? How, is there any type of engagement? You also need to articulate to them, what is the value in money, right? In ROI, because oftentimes saying things like, we want brand evangelists and we want to build a really strong community, that's a bit nebulous, which is what I've learned, because for me, I'm like, don't you want a strong community? But if you don't necessarily have the numbers, or the ROI or the research to back up the why behind these social media initiatives, it's very difficult to get that executive buy-in. So it's definitely a challenge, but it's something that if you put in the work, if you have the numbers in the front end, you should be able to kind of push this initiative forward.
Well, and I think that's so important, because of course we want to build strong communities, but how do you measure that? How do you, like, I'm currently in this conversations because we're working on new DI like goals, and it's like, okay, how do we know if we did X, Y, or Z? And it goes back to the, SMART goals, so specific, measurable, outcome oriented, time specific, etc.
Exactly. So just making sure that you are going into initiative, or you're building out this initiative with the measurements in mind and the type of performance that you want in mind, because whatever isn't measured, you can't really report on it. You know, it's that much more difficult. And to show success, and oftentimes with these initiatives, it's about showing leadership success from a corporate POV. If you can't show that we brought X amount of this, or we, you know, increased community growth and development, or, you know, channel expansion in numbers, it's hard to get backing, it's hard to get funding, it's hard to get budget, you know, so all of those things kind of correlate.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions for Tim?
I see a lot of praise, which is amazing. Thank you, everyone.
Well deserved, well deserved. Well, if there aren't any other questions, I want to thank you, Tim, so much for your time, your experience, your expertise, your great analogies and wonderful storytelling. And I'm so happy you agreed to do this, and you did a fabulous job.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Hernandez.
Yeah.
I'm, once again, you know, special thank you to you. I'm just really excited to be here and to have told a little bit of my story. And I, you know, hope we kind of keep the conversation going.
Yeah, we'll definitely stay in touch. Thank you so
course.
much. All right. And thank you all for joining as well. We really appreciate it. And we'll have a recording of this, so we'll post it on social, and I'm sure many other people will benefit from your talk.
Awesome. Thank you
All
so
right.
much.
Thank you
Thank you,
again.
everyone.
Have a great evening.
Take care.